fairytail next generation would most likely flop, and would end up being hated by the fans themselves. A big chunk of the fairytail fandom is highly excited to see Mashima make a fairytail next generation manga. Seeing the kids of the characters we grown to like doing their own thing is definitely exciting and promising. However, in my opinion, a long-running fairytail next generation manga would be a disaster. It would most likely flop, and people who are currently asking for it would most likely turn against it and start hating it as well. A next generation long-running manga would most definitely be a disaster for many different reasons. We have to just look at Boruto's case to understand why wouldn't it work. When Boruto first got shown, people were highly excited about it. They wanted to see the next generation in action. There were tons of fanfiction already available regarding the next generation. However, when Boruto actually arrived, the exact same people who asked for it started hating the show and the manga with different excuses. They slowly turned against Boruto. The truth is, just because something works in fanfiction doesn't mean they will work in canon. Next generation tend to work in fanfiction, however, when it comes to making it into an actual long-running manga, they tend to fail, or the fandom tends to just start hating it. People didn't like that old well-established characters were sidelined to borderline non-existence. People didn't like that old characters got defeated by new strong characters. In fact, people didn't even like the fact that there were new strong characters, stronger than previously well-established strong characters to begin with. People also didn't like how strong the new generation was. They didn't like the fact that they got stronger faster than the previous generation did. People found to complain about nearly everything, every small minor detail. The exact same reason people hated Boruto and hate Boruto could be applied to fairytail next generation. Why wouldn't it work and why would it be hated? New generation manga would clearly focus on the new generation, but would mean the old generation has to be sidelined, and many people would clearly not like that. They would like to see the old generation in action as well constantly, but would defeat the entire purpose of a new generation manga. What's the point of a new generation long-running manga when the old generation would constantly steal the spotlight? So you clearly can't make a new generation manga without upsetting the fandom. If you do one thing, one side of the fandom would complain that the old generation keeps stealing the spotlight. Well, if you do the other thing, the other side of the fandom would complain that Natsu, Erza, Grey, Lucy and so on are just side characters. Another thing what needs to be considered is tension and new antagonists. Fairytail is a battle shonen manga, and a long-running next generation manga would most likely be one as well. And to make an interesting battle shonen manga, you need tension, conflict, stakes and antagonists who can be taken seriously. And this is where another problem can be found, what will make Fairytail next generation manga not work. The old Fairytail generation is extremely powerful. Team Natsu has enough power to face characters who can destroy planets, rewrite reality, and make people into constellations. A new threat introduced, far more powerful than the previous one in the next generation, would not make much sense in lore for most people without any build-up, and they would just be way more powerful than the next generation is. The enemies would also be hated simply because they would be stronger than the old generation, or already well-established antagonists like Acnologia or Zeref. For example, there is a significant chunk in the Fairytail fandom who has a distaste towards the 5 dragon gods because they got stated to be on par with Acnologia. And if the new enemies are actually far weaker than the old ones, they wouldn't be taken seriously simply because people would know that anyone from the old generation could just pop up and solo the entire antagonist group without breaking a sweat. The power difference between the old generation and the new antagonist group would be so large that they just couldn't be taken seriously. Even if the new enemies would be on par with the next generation and the story would focus on the next generation, people would disregard any stake simply because of the existence of the old generation who are powerful enough to handle the new threats relatively easily. They would either complain that the new enemies are far too powerful for absolutely no reason, surpassing already well-liked powerful characters like Acnologia or Zeref, or they would complain because the enemies are far too weak to be taken seriously. It's also worth mentioning that if the enemies would be more powerful than the old ones, the next generation would need to gain power in much faster way than the previous generation, but would also lead to people complaining and hating because how dare the new generation be stronger than the previous one. One way to solve this would be killing off the old generation, but again, that would make people hate the next generation because it killed off already well established and beloved characters for no reason. So what is the point of seeing Gajil's kid if Gajil dies in exchange? That's not really a equal exchange. So whatever route Mashima would go with fairytail next generation long-running manga, people would find a way to hate it and complain about it. As I said previously, just because something works in fanfiction, it doesn't mean it will work in canon as well. Don't get me wrong, I would absolutely like to see next generation story revolving around the kids of fairytail members, but a long-running battle shonen manga wouldn't work as things are currently. It will be hated by the fandom itself, and that is the last thing what the fairytail fandom needs. However, there are ways to make fairytail next generation manga without upsetting people on this level. First way will be a series of short stories revolving around the next generation. It will follow their adventures lasting few chapters and volumes at best, like how Fairytail Zero did. This would remove all the stuff I mentioned previously what people would complain about, simply because it is short and because it wouldn't go too deep into lore stuff as a long-running manga would, leaving less thing for people to complain about and funding faults in, while also giving them what they have asked for. The second thing what could make Fairytail next generation manga work on a long-running way would be if it would be playing in Edolas. The thing is, Edolas already has a next generation and it doesn't have many of the issues what Earthland next generation would. For example, the overall power level in Edolas is drastically lower than that of Earthland, meaning Mashima could introduce new antagonists who are relatively weaker than their Earthland counterparts in a way that would still make them threatening and dangerous. This way new enemies and antagonists would bring tension and stakes to the story. People would take them seriously simply because there is no Earthland Natsu and Erza with planetary powers to jump in and save the day. Edolas Natsu is just a human who drives a car and acts cool, while Erza is just a knight. New strong enemies could also be introduced without it going against the already well-established lore from Earthland. Look, I would definitely like to see a Fairytail next generation long-running manga, following the adventures of Nashi and Grieg. However, I just know people would eventually turn against it and start hating it, or they will start complaining about every minor detail like how people do with Boruto. And I really don't want that. Fairytail is already constantly bombarded with hatred. The last thing I would want is the fandom itself splitting in half and hating the manga simply because Natsu didn't got X amount of screen time or because the new enemy is stronger than Acnologia. I really wish for a successful Fairytail next generation. I really do. But looking at the anime fandom's current state and the Mashima fandom, I just feel in my bones Fairytail next generation long-running manga would end up either becoming a failure or hated by its own fandom. As I said before, just because something works in fanfiction doesn't mean it will work in canon. This was Space G, and see you guys in space.